Welcome. Today we are looking at an excerpt from the interview series, Let's Discover God Together.
Mm-hmm.
And in this specific one, host Steve Reed sits down with Paul Young.
Right, the author of The Shack.
Exactly. We all know the massive cultural footprint of that book. I mean, it was everywhere.
Oh, absolutely everywhere.
But what we are extracting today
Mhm.
is the underlying, deeply personal, and honestly, pretty grueling psychological dismantling that actually
Sure.
produced that theology.
Yeah.
We're going to track his path from a trauma-forged childhood to a really radical reframing of how we understand and connect with the divine. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, and as we get into this, you might notice the backdrop today. It resembles a cozy, slightly chaotic writer's study.
It does.
And it feels fitting for this material because the core theme we are analyzing here is how surviving immense trauma can completely deconstruct,
A rebuild.
right, meticulously rebuild a person's entire understanding of existence, suffering, and the stories we basically construct just to survive the world.
Because this conversation, it directly challenges traditional, fear-based views of the universe.
It really does.
It offers a totally paradigm-shifting lens on how we process pain, how we deal with the illusion of control, and how we conceptualize divine love.
Mm.
But to understand the theology, we really have to examine the psychology first. And the source material, it doesn't shy away from the darkness of Paul's origin story.
No, it's a very heavy beginning, but it is the absolute foundation for every single philosophical conclusion he reaches later on.
Yeah. So Paul was born in Canada, but he was raised as a missionary kid in the highlands of New Guinea.
Right.
And while he acknowledges the beauty of that culture, he even notes the tribal language was his first dreaming language, he suffered horrific sexual abuse within that environment,
Starting at age 5.
age 5. And then, at age 6, he was sent away to a boarding school where the abuse actually continued.
It's just devastating.
By his own admission, by the time he was 6 years old, he had completely lost any sense of identity. He survived by building this massive, impenetrable wall between his intellect and his emotions.
What's fascinating here is the specific architecture of that survival mechanism.
What do you mean?
Well, he describes it as living entirely from the outside in.
Okay.
When a child is subjected to that level of trauma, the world becomes fundamentally unsafe. So Paul developed an extreme form of hypervigilance.
Right, constantly scanning.
Exactly. He learned to instantly read a room, figure out exactly what the adults or authority figures wanted him to be, and then he would project that false persona.
Oh,
He was essentially a chameleon. He was constantly performing just to pick up scraps of approval and ensure his own survival.
so if you build that kind of psychological fortress at age 6, how long can a person actually sustain that level of compartmentalization before it just fractures?
In Paul's case, it held for decades.
Decades.
Decades. He lived that way, hiding behind his intelligence, using words and, theological debate to keep people at a safe distance.
While secretly struggling.
Right, secretly struggling with a pornography addiction. And this went on until he was 38 years old.
And that was the breaking point.
That was it. His wife caught him in a 3-month affair with one of her close friends.
Man.
And that event just completely shattered his constructed reality. He hit absolute rock bottom. He was even contemplating suicide, convinced he only existed to cause pain to the people around him.
He notes in the interview that he realized he didn't need some delicate art restoration for his soul.
No.
He said he needed a wrecking ball.
A wrecking ball, yeah.
But a wrecking ball isn't a quick fix.
Far from it. That moment, it initiated an 11-year dismantling journey.
11 years.
Think about what that actually entails. It wasn't just a matter of deciding to be honest one day.
Right.
It was a brutal decade of retraining his nervous system.
Yeah.
He had to unlearn the hypervigilance that had literally kept him alive.
He had to drop the mask.
Exactly. He had to stop the subconscious scanning of every room and that automatic projection of a false self.
That sounds exhausting.
It took over a decade of therapy and internal work to achieve. The goal was to finally live from the inside out, to become the exact same person in every single situation, completely exposed, without secrets, and entirely truthful.
Which brings us to the actual creation of the shack.
Yes.
So it's the 12th year of this journey. Paul is turning 50.
Mm-hmm.
Emotionally, he is finally healthy, but financially, they have lost everything. They are completely broke.
But strangely, he is content.
Right. He is no longer trying to be the perfect, high-achieving missionary kid. and his wife had been asking him for years to write down his thoughts for their 6 kids, just to put his worldview into one document.
It was intended strictly as a private family document, just a Christmas gift to explain his hard-won understanding of grace and healing.
And he went to Office Depot to print it.
Yeah. He printed 15 copies because they were on sale. It was cheaper than printing 8 copies at Kinko's.
That is amazing. But let's pause on a hidden detail from the source material regarding that story, because the psychological implications are staggering.
Oh, the initials.
The initials. The main character of the book is Mackenzie Allen Phillips, M.A.P.
Yeah.
And the 5-year-old daughter, who was tragically murdered in the narrative, is Melissa Ann Phillips.
Also M.A.P.
Those are Paul's own initials.
Wow.
He is literally writing a narrative where his adult self has to reconcile with the divine over the horrific trauma inflicted on his childhood self.
That is so powerful.
He wrote it specifically to save his own kids from 30 years of the toxic theology he grew up with.
And that transition from psychology to theology is really critical here. His childhood understanding of the divine was deeply intertwined with the trauma and fear he experienced.
So what does this all mean for how we view the divine today?
Right.
Because Paul grew up with what he calls a mixed bag of beliefs.
Yeah.
On one hand, he was taught God is love.
But on the other hand,
Exactly. He was taught about hellfire, damnation, a wrathful deity, and the idea that humans have this core sin nature, making them fundamentally depraved from birth.
the shift in his thinking is profound. And it hinges on a very specific realization. He says God didn't evolve. Humanity's understanding of God evolved.
Okay.
He completely rejects the traditional religious concept of eternal conscious torment. He argues that such a concept fundamentally contradicts the Greek word agape.
Agape.
Yes, agape is the word used in the original texts for God's love. It doesn't mean conditional affection.
Right.
It describes an other-centered, self-giving, co-suffering love. Crucially, the definition of agape explicitly states that it keeps no record of wrongs.
Wait, if the divine keeps absolutely no record of wrongs, how does Paul reconcile that with the concept of justice?
That is the big question.
Does he just throw out the idea of divine judgment entirely?
This reframing of wrath and judgment is where Paul introduces a completely different analogy.
Oh, the tumor analogy.
Yes. He asks us to imagine a father who discovers his precious daughter has a brain tumor.
Okay.
That father instantly becomes a flaming fire of love that wants to completely destroy that tumor.
The wrath isn't directed at the daughter.
Exactly. The wrath is directed entirely at the tumor, the sickness, the lie that is destroying her. Paul argues that divine wrath is exactly like that.
It's only ever directed at the things within us that prevent us from being fully human and fully alive.
The judgment is purely restorative. It is the fire of a surgeon, not a torturer.
That is a huge distinction. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains a rather fascinating dynamic Paul mentions having with his atheist friends.
Oh, this part is brilliant.
In the interview, he notes that he tells atheists they are halfway to Jesus from religion.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive.
Right.
But his logic is structurally sound. If the deity you were taught to believe in acts like a monster, if that entity is diabolical, horrific, and rules through fear, arbitrary rules, and threats of eternal torture,
then rejecting that entity is actually a spiritually healthy response.
exactly, your conscience is working correctly. Paul argues that if that's the version of the divine on offer, you should be an atheist to it.
He frequently tells atheists, tell me about the God you don't believe in, because I probably don't believe in that God either.
That completely strips away the typical fear-based model that so many associate with religion.
But of course, removing a punitive God naturally leads to the heaviest question of all.
The problem of evil.
Yes, the one Steve Reed brings up in the interview. People look around at the world, or at the wreckage of their own lives, and they ask, if the divine is so good and there's no vengeful wrath, why isn't this entity in control of the suffering we see every day?
It is the ultimate philosophical stumbling block.
Yeah.
Paul strongly pushes back against the word controlling. He references a poem by his friend David Tenson, which essentially argues that applying the word controlling to the divine is cruel.
How so?
Well, if an all-powerful being is actively orchestrating war, disease, torture, and childhood abuse as part of some mysterious master plan, then that being is a deified monster. Paul argues that we have to divorce the concept of sovereignty from the concept of micromanagement.
Here's where it gets really interesting. To explain how the divine actually interacts with our pain, Paul shares a story he learned from a master violin maker.
I love this story.
When these craftsmen are looking for wood to build an instrument, they go up into the mountains with a tuning fork. They are looking for specific trees they call singers.
Singers?
And the best singers are almost always found at the junctures where two rivers meet.
Because the environment there is inherently violent.
Exactly. Those trees have been battered and twisted by the elements. They have survived rocks and other logs crashing into them during flash floods.
And all of that relentless trauma actually changes the molecular structure of the wood itself.
Yes. Now, when a master violin maker harvests that wood, he doesn't take a perfect mathematical template and plane the wood down to fit some flawless, uniform ideal.
Because if he did that, he would cut right across the unique experience of the tree.
He would completely destroy its ability to produce a resonant sound.
Right.
Instead, the master violin maker submits to the wood.
That phrase carries immense theological weight. The master submits to the wood.
Yeah.
Paul uses this to explain that the divine doesn't swoop in to erase our trauma, smooth out our wrinkles, or delete our painful histories.
The divine is not a transcendent engineer forcing a rigid, perfect blueprint onto human lives.
Instead, God acts as the ultimate artist. The artist submits to our unique experiences, even the horrific, unjustifiable trauma, and works within those contours to release our unique sound.
But Paul is very careful not to use that metaphor to justify the trauma itself.
Absolutely not.
He explicitly references Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov here to make sure we don't try to wrap a neat intellectual bow around suffering.
Yes. He points to Ivan Karamazov's famous rebellion against the idea of a harmonious universe built on the suffering of innocence.
Okay.
Ivan argues that even if a future paradise is achieved, if it costs the unatoned tears of one tortured child, he would respectfully return his ticket to that universe.
And Paul agrees with that premise. He argues that the infinite value of a single human life makes it impossible to ever justify abuse or evil with a simple intellectual argument. We will never find a satisfying philosophical answer to the why of evil.
So, if the why is unanswerable, how does Paul suggest we navigate a world so full of pain?
He says we have to shift the question.
To what?
We have to stop agonizing over why and start asking, now what?
Now what? It is a grounding perspective that moves us out of abstract philosophical debates and forces us into immediate practical reality.
Now, what means dealing entirely in the present tense? It means looking at the reality right in front of you. Yes, it might involve prayer or meditation, but it also means giving hugs.
Sitting with a friend who is grieving without trying to fix them.
Exactly. It means helping a sick relative manage their medication, doing the dishes, taking out the garbage. Paul argues that responding with agape, that other-centered love, in those ordinary, everyday moments, literally changes the molecular structure of the cosmos for the better.
It scales the grand cosmic battle between good and evil down to our daily mundane interactions.
Yeah.
It empowers the individual. It suggests that you don't need to understand the vast architecture of the universe to enact meaningful, restorative change within it. You just have to be present and choose love in the microscopic moments.
Which perfectly sets up the absolute core of this entire Discover God Together series.
Right.
This is the central mission of Steve Reed's interviews. When Steve finally asked Paul the pivotal question, what advice he would give to someone who was desperately searching for the true God.
Someone who wants to bypass the institutions, cut through the theology, and just experience the divine.
Exactly. Paul's answer is disarmingly simple.
It cuts right through thousands of years of religious bureaucracy and behavioral modification.
He simply says, just ask him. Ask them.
Just ask.
He encourages people to take the risk of vulnerability and ask incredibly simple, childlike questions to the universe. Things like, are you in me, or do you love me?
This raises an important question for anyone attempting this, though. If a person actually takes that psychological risk and asks the void those vulnerable questions, how does the divine actually answer?
We aren't talking about a cinematic booming voice from the clouds.
Right. According to Paul, we are looking in the wrong direction. Because he believes the divine fully indwells us, meaning that agape presence is already woven into the fabric of our being. We don't have to look up to the sky.
We can hear the response in our own imagination.
We can process it through our own rationality. We can feel it through a sudden shift in our relationships, in an unexpected act of kindness from a stranger.
Or, and he emphasizes this, even in a random pop song on the radio that suddenly breaks through your defenses and moves you to tears.
Yes.
He argues that the divine will meet us in whatever specific language or medium we are capable of understanding in that exact moment.
The adaptability of that presence is crucial, and the source material shares a profoundly moving example to illustrate just how far that adaptability goes.
This part really got me.
Paul works extensively with trafficked women who have been unspeakably abused by men and often deeply betrayed by the women who were supposed to protect them.
Yeah.
For someone carrying that specific severe trauma, any traditional human metaphor for God, a father figure, a king, even a mother figure, is utterly terrifying.
It isn't comforting. It is an immediate psychological trigger.
Exactly. So, how does the divine communicate with someone whose trauma has walled off all human connection?
Paul notes that for many of these women, the divine often appears in their minds, their meditations, and their dreams as a black Labrador retriever,
Consider the implications of that. A dog.
a dog. Because to a person whose nervous system is shattered by human abuse, a friendly dog is the only thing that registers as safe.
A dog is unconditionally loving, it is entirely present, it doesn't demand performance.
And it doesn't trigger their trauma. It simply proves that the divine is completely unoffended by our damage and infinitely adaptable. God meets us exactly where we are, no matter how broken, unreachable, or untraditional we might think our circumstances are.
It is a radical reimagining of the divine nature that completely removes the human ego we so often project onto it.
Yeah.
An ego-driven deity would demand to be worshipped in a specific, majestic, historically accurate form. An agape-driven deity, an endlessly loving artist, just wants to connect and restore, even if that means shedding all majesty and showing up as a black lab just to make a terrified human being feel safe enough to breathe.
When you look at your own life, whether you feel like you have checked all the right spiritual boxes and maintained a flawless resume, or whether you feel completely battered by the river of life like one of those traumatized signal trees, Paul's perspective suggests that absolutely none of that disqualifies you.
No.
In fact, those experiences, the grief, the mistakes, the deep scars, they are the exact material being used right now to carve out your unique resonance in the world. The invitation isn't to fix yourself first. The invitation is simply just ask.
And this leaves us with a fascinating implication to consider. We have spent this time discussing how the divine acts as an artist, submitting to the twisted wood of our trauma rather than forcing us into a perfect, transcendent blueprint. Right. But consider what this means for how we view each other. In our relationships, our parenting, and our friendships, we are often obsessed with fixing the people we love.
We want to cure their emotional scars and plane them down to a healthy ideal.
But if the divine itself refuses to play the transcendent engineer, are we accidentally doing harm when we aggressively try to fix each other? Perhaps true love isn't about repairing the wood of the people around us, but finally learning how to submit to their unique, battered sound.
That completely shifts the paradigm of how we love. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Whatever river you find yourself in today, stay curious, keep exploring, and we will catch you next time.